think I'm live. I might be live. I think I'm live. Excellent. Hello, friends. Welcome back. Sorry we missed last week, but you know, there are other things we do as well besides give online seminars. But I am happy to be back, and this week to take our first steps down the dark path of publicity, and start to look at how you get your story told. We spoke last time about branding. We went really more in depth into that, and I think it's an important point to reiterate that it's something that artists struggle with all the time, and that thinking about it being selling your soul to the corporate overlords and cheapening your complex brand is it's not the way to think about it. And I hope that the last session helped with that, but just emphasizing that you should see your brand and your story as a refinement of your artistic and your creative vision, not a cheapening of it. It's focusing on the best possible story to tell about yourself. And the process of determining that, it should not be some sterile, soul-sucking exercise. It should be a creative process, just like your art is. And so I want to emphasize that again, and we'll do more branding in future sessions, but I just think that's a sea change of how people think about it in our industry that's important to happen, to make happen within yourselves. But today we're gonna move into publicity, and moving forward, I'm gonna start to integrate branding and marketing into publicity, because I think it's really, really important to think about them in an integrated capacity. The same is true for social media and publicity. Oftentimes, sort of institutions or publicists and social media agencies will try to silo those two things, and to me, that is not constructive. Within our industry, the only way I think to be successful at both is to think of them as two sides of the same coin. So we'll talk more in depth about social media in future sessions, but throughout the upcoming seminars, I'm going to be talking about how and sort of demonstrating how social media and publicity can work hand in hand. So this is probably going to be a little more high level, like the very first session was. I want to focus on publicity, but I want to really look at the different things that go into it, and also just to start with what it is. And as with branding, I think there are so many different ways to think about it, and there are different ways that people talk about what publicity is based on their industry, their experience, or their position within the same industry. And so again, to me, I think of publicity, and our company, my team, we all do the work of publicity with the understanding that it is about shaping perception and conversation around the public-facing profile of an artist. It's how you tell the story and how you get others to tell the story, and how the telling of that story influences what people think and feel about you. And it all goes back to that, that top level of your brand story, where when people see your name, what do they feel? What are the first 2 or 3 emotions that spring to mind? And that does not just happen. That comes of sustained publicity and public exposure around a story. And again, that can sound super manipulative and Machiavellian, and if you're in like the tobacco lobbying industry, it totally 100% is. It's horrible. But in our industry, it's not. It doesn't have to be. It can be in certain cases, which I'm not going to dive into. I think we've all seen over the last few years, in particular, spin and publicity that is in service of people who do bad. And that is something that should never be the case, but it is. Some people compromise themselves. I'm not going to talk about that. That's a horrible thing to do. For us, it should be about taking control of the process of storytelling rather than just throwing it to the wind. And that is not manipulative. That is being proactive. And people can say, oh, these are just words, it's semantics, but it's not. And if you feel otherwise, I would welcome contrary opinions in the comments, but I just want to emphasize that doing this kind of promotion, it's not manipulating. It is just telling a better story. It's the same idea that managers or bookers do, and that they're trying to convince presenters to care and to be excited about an artist, and as a result to book them to perform. Whereas in publicity, it's more about trying to get people excited about a story so that they tell the story. They become evangelists unto themselves around the story of an artist and the career of an artist. So it is the same process, just with different aims. But good publicity can massively help managers and bookers to do their jobs better. So it's important to see it part of the larger spectrum of a career as well, and the larger sort of team and infrastructure around a career as it develops. So again, the core point of publicity, the core question of it is, how do you get others to tell your story? How do you leverage the reach of others to get them to tell your story to a larger audience than you might have yourself? And it's important to pause and make the point that it's not always most important to reach the most people. Sometimes it's more important to reach the right people. And if you're trying to promote a concert and you get on some outlet that has huge reach, but it's not people who are going to be interested in going to your concert, that doesn't matter. If you get on some tiny email list that goes to 100 people, but 90 out of those 100 people buy tickets, then that's more valuable. So you want to always also think about publicity as who you are trying to reach and why you want to reach them, as well as just the sheer numbers of it. It's about creating this sense of momentum around your career. And when somebody hears about you from one source, and then hears about you from another source, and then maybe sees a video from you on social media, and they all reflect the same storytelling, those impressions is what they're called in marketing, but those impressions and those views, the process of hearing about you in the same way, in the same capacity through different channels, cements your presence in their mind and their mind share. And that is also why publicity and social media must be integrated, because those impressions can come from different sources, from traditional media, from social media, just from people talking about you backstage at another concert, etc. So I'm going to look at a few high-level topics that, again, we're going to delve into more in future sessions, because I do want to try to keep these a little shorter so I'm not wasting heaps of people's time. But a few things that I want to just talk about, the levels of publicity, because there are different sort of tiers and echelons and rarefied atmospheres of publicity. There's the sort of high-level amorphous long lead pitching, and this is the kind of stuff where it's industry magazines that might take years to get features, and you have to climb the ladder from a small feature, a medium-sized feature, a cover feature on a magazine, etc. And those kinds of things take a sustained sort of presence and a sustained conversation with the people at these places in order to convince them to buy into an artist and an artist's story. And that often does not happen with a single pitch, but it often happens over the course of several conversations that sort of grease the wheels in a sense. And then when the time comes to make that pitch, you make that pitch, and then the story manifests itself. But that is often, it's difficult in that it's often more amorphous and less tangible, that type of publicity, in that it does not often yield direct results, but it is hugely important. And this is often the purview of paid publicists, but it is really important to make sure that it is not the only thing a publicist does for you, because it can be also become smoke and mirrors and BS because somebody can say, oh, I'm doing these things, but they don't yield results, but they could just as well not be doing them. So you want to be careful with that high level. It is hugely important, but it can be an area where artists can get abused or hoodwinked by the people that they pay to do this work for them. Sort of on a more practical level, there is proactive, ongoing, targeted pitching around things, discrete events and things that are happening. That can be performances, record releases, content, etc. And that is where you are trying to secure attention and storytelling around a specific thing. More often than not, a timestamped thing that has what's called a peg, which is the performance or the record release or the launch of a video, etc. And that becomes sort of a much more accountable type of publicity, where if the event comes and goes and there is no storytelling around it, then the publicity has not been successful, quite frankly, more often than not. And I'll delve into this later, as in that there are ways that you cannot have a tangible result and still have some value come. But by and large, that kind of thing is measured by the success of the outreach and the pitching. And then lastly, there's reactive publicity, which is, again, more the realm of professional publicists, where it's things that come in for one artist that might be leveraged for another artist, or opportunities that arise in general conversations with media that could potentially have a story told, as a result of that conversation. But for an artist, that's not really that relevant, at least not initially. But those are different levels and ways to think about how people approach publicity, and the means of securing publicity. And this is something that we're going to talk a lot more in depth. I know one of the questions was around this, how to pitch. And by the way, if you guys have questions or comments, or just want to fling curse words out there, feel free to hit that up in the comments, and I'll try to get to them as we go along. But so the means of securing publicity, that can be one of the easiest ways to do it is leveraging the PR departments at venues, at presenters that work for presenters and are responsible for promoting a performance, to put butts in the seats for the presenter and the person who has stake in that performance. That's an art unto itself, but it's one that is very learnable if you approach it properly. And I'll spend some time on that probably on the next session, since it's very, very important and valuable for artists, I think, to know how to do that. It is an area that has, over the last 5-10 years or so, has seen a sea change in our industry, and that media are okay being approached directly by artists. 10, 15 years ago, that was not really the case. Now it totally is, and sometimes can be even more powerful for media and compelling for media, because they feel like they're getting the kind of raw, uncut, unfiltered artist, which makes it all the more important to have your act together and to know the best practices of how to do that, so that you don't come across as unprofessional in those interactions. So that's something we'll spend quite a bit of time on, probably on a dedicated session. Other means of securing publicity, there's sending out a press release to a bunch of media. This used to be important. Now it is essentially the least valuable part of publicity. Unless you are like a huge institution, that is almost never a way to actually get publicity. It is the first shot across the bow of the act of publicity, because where the rubber hits the road is in pitching around these events, initiatives, content. And that's where you reach out directly one-to-one to a writer, to a producer, to an influencer, etc., and try to sell them on your story or whatever you're trying to get them to talk about. And that process of pitching, that is incredibly important as well. And it's important to learn the best practices, how to structure pitches, how to do email subject lines, how to structure your asks, the call to action that you put out there to the producers, how to follow up properly, and so on. And then when you get interest, how to manage that process effectively. So pitching is hugely important. And I do want to pause for 1 second, because also, like, what you're pitching around is something I want to talk a minute about, because, you know, events are important, and things like an album release or stuff like that is important. But, and this was a question from Juliana, right now there are none of those things. There are no performances. So other than live streams. And so I think it's really important to realize that content can be as important of an event as a physical performance, when it is presented properly, when it's structured properly. And this is something that more traditional minded people in our industry and other industries struggle to kind of understand, the idea that social media can be as much a part of traditional publicity as the New York Times or, you know, a radio station, and oftentimes can be even more impactful. And so shifting, for now anyway, the focus to online, and how to find storytellers online, people with a platform, people who are media, who are in the middle between a story and people who might want to be told that story, how to find them and how to convince them to tell your story. And with media, that's finding a writer and saying, do you want to write a story, or do you want to review a concert? With social media and digital media, that can be finding somebody who has a huge Instagram following and saying, do you want to create a video with me where we do something together that will reach your following? I made a video that might be of interest based on the videos that you give to your following, you post to your following. Would you be interested in having an exclusive on it? And again, this is an area we'll dive into in a more sort of active and sort of tactical capacity on its own, because again, it's obviously hugely important right now. But that idea, it's just important to expand the thinking of storytelling and media to include people who have a following or have access to a number of people online that they can reach and they can spread a story to. And again, like, for instance, we have an artist where he had a video segment produced for an online outlet that is, you know, under a subsidiary of CNN. No traditional reach, no physical, no sort of nothing that would be considered traditional media, but it has a great reach, and the video segment was beautiful, and CNN ended up sharing it on their Instagram. They didn't broadcast it on TV, they didn't put it on like their website anywhere. It was simply shared to their Instagram, but they have 10 million followers. And so there's nothing traditional about that piece of media, but, you know, he reached a huge number of people. He gained, you know, 2,500 Instagram followers in a day. And, you know, now he's got The Voice in America's Got Talent sort of in a bidding war to get him to be on the shows. So new media can have as much, if not far more of an impact than traditional media. And so it's important, really important to think about them again in that integrated way. So those are just some means of securing publicity and promoting them. We're going to talk about specifically, like I said, promoting your performances, and that's speaking to the PR departments and social media departments at these venues and these presenters, and helping them to get motivated by you and by your story, and giving them the tools, the assets, the information they need in the way that is most useful to them, so that they can do their job in the easiest way possible, because they're often overworked or lazy, and giving them the easiest, the most friction-free way possible to do their job will often get far better results than if you just leave them to it. But also you want to, it's nuancing that approach, taking a nuanced approach so that you're not the squeaky wheel, or you're not pushing too hard. And we all know artists who push too hard, who self-promote too much. And yes, they can sometimes get more results and they can get more publicity, but oftentimes over time, that approach does more damage than it does good. And so that's something I really want to emphasize in all of this is publicity is best done with a light touch. And if you are promoting too hard, then people stop believing your story because they believe the story is being forced on them. And this is true of publicity, this is true of marketing, this is true of everything. You know, people come to products, they come to events, experiences, because they feel they're being drawn into it, not because it's shoved down their throat most of the time. So you want to think of publicity in that way too. So, you know, so when promoting performances, it's coming up with what are the interesting angles, you know, who are local media that you might have a connection to, or you might be able to pitch if you don't feel like the PR department's doing their job, how to actually write those pitches, shape them, send them, when to send them, when to follow up, etc. So all of those things. Project planning, and this is something that has been another kind of sea change in our industry, is that projects that often have no or little major institutional support or sort of infrastructure in terms of the expense around them, the sort of traditional scope around them, can have huge publicity and can get huge storytelling done around them if they are put together intelligently and tell a compelling story that relates to an artist. So this is an area where artists can be very proactive. It takes work and it takes time and effort and planning and sometimes a little bit of capital as well. But it is one of the best ways to build a public profile. If your concerts, your sort of paid concerts are not getting, or paid events are not huge publicity generating things. This can be, creating your own project can be a way to do that. It can also be a way to waste a lot of time and money if you don't actually focus the publicity properly or do the publicity properly. So that's something we'll spend time on as well, and the sort of creation of assets. The creation of assets is something else we'll talk about, and that sort of ties into marketing. How, again, photos, like you could do a photo shoot every day just because you like to sit in front of a camera, but it doesn't really help unless you have a reason for those photos to be put out into the world. And like if you have an album coming or you have a tour, then, or you're trying to sort of introduce a new story angle around yourself, then having photos that tell that story, that compellingly present that sort of brand, that idea, that concept, can be hugely valuable. But that you can also, if you're not sort of thoughtful and structured in how you create those photos, who you do the shoot with, what the styling is like, what the sort of mood is like, the mood board, then you know, you can get photos that don't really reflect, or at worst are contrary to the story you're trying to tell with those photos. Same thing with video. I get a lot of people who just say, you know, I need to make more video. I want to make a video. And my point is always, why? Who's going to watch it other than the people you already have access to? And so to me, you know, we never create video unless we already know how it's going to be used and we have a good sense of how that video will expand the reach of an artist. And that can be, again, creating something that, you know, recording a video of a piece that, or an excerpt or an aria from a piece that you're going to be singing a lot or performing a lot. And that content can not only be shared by all of the venues where you perform this work, it can be used, chopped up and used by their social media teams to promote it for paid marketing. It can be, you know, sent to, if you're on a local TV show, it can be used as B-roll footage for the TV segment, etc. So thinking about that, or creating a video, again, that you know that there's a sort of an influencer or a social media account that likes this kind of video, and you make it with this express purpose of trying to get them to leverage it and to post it and share it. So that goes hand in hand with sort of larger project planning. Is it should only be done if there is a real sense of the why and the how it is going to have a reach. Then there are things like media monitoring, and analytics, how to understand the actual impact of what you do. And that's, Google Alerts and Google Analytics, social media mentions and insights, etc. All of these are important to know how to parse and to know how to read in a way that is actually useful, actionable, and sort of understandable in a visceral sense, and understanding what the actual impact is of, say, an interview feature that goes live. Does it drive a ton of people to your website? Does it not? Is there a social media feature that has huge impact in terms of the growth of your Facebook fans, but doesn't actually send people to your website, or does and has this sort of huge impact across all your digital presence? Being able to understand those things and begin to connect the dots is a really valuable way to recognize the difference between impactful publicity and media content, like media stories, and ones that are a bit more sort of vanity metrics, or social media, like publicity that can be used as social media content. And that's not to say that one is definitely better than the other. There are some things that have huge reach and impact that don't actually look that good, or aren't really presentable to people in a meaningful way. And then there are, blogs, for instance, where interviews have no real organic reach, or negligible organic reach in terms of the number of new people who will see and read that, but which look beautiful when, say, presented on social media, or tell your story in a really well done way. And those can be hugely valuable to build your social media following, to build the sense of momentum, to have something that somebody else has done to show people that others are telling your story. That alone can be valuable. And that's, again, the integration of PR and social media comes into play there. And knowing what comes of actually looking at the numbers and understanding the numbers. And it does not have to be overwhelming. It's simply learning what are the sort of key metrics that you need to be aware of, and what do they actually mean. So that's another thing we'll sort of dive into a little bit. We'll talk as well about hiring a publicist. It's an area where a lot of people get screwed or don't know what they're actually trying to achieve. And just, to me, there are some very key things to consider before you hire a publicist, and knowing what you're going to get, what you're trying to achieve, and how to, have some accountability, but how to also make sure that you're not setting someone up for failure, and you're giving them the best possible shot at storytelling that you can. And so, that's another thing we'll talk about. So, that's like 20 minutes of me talking about all of the different things that go into publicity. And there are, of course, more things as well. But it is a complicated business, and it's the business of an entire career. But the more that you understand what goes into it, and ideally gain some experience hands-on doing it, the more that you will, A, be able to do it yourself powerfully in a way that contributes to the success of your career, and B, hold accountable people who are doing it for you. And again, that can be paid publicists, that can be venue PR, that can be your manager, your agent. Are they telling your story well? Are they using your assets in a good way? So again, to me, this is taking control of this is one of the most important things that an artist can do early in their career, or in the sort of the development stages of their career, because if not, it will be very hard to have an impact, to have a true sort of felt sense of momentum and concentrated storytelling. So again, going back to the start, like I want to emphasize to not think of it as sort of manipulation, but rather as taking your career and your art into your own hands and controlling what is done around it, around everything that surrounds you on a stage, or you recording an album, everything that surrounds it that will give you the biggest possible potential to reach ever larger audiences, and again, expose more people to what you are trying to say, what you're trying to communicate about the human experience, yourself, the art that we all revel in. So that's a lot. If anybody has, of the things that I've outlined, if you guys have things you particularly want to hear about first, whether it be sort of actual pitching, whether it be, promoting performances, planning projects, media monitoring, etc., let me know. You can do it in the comments, you can do on the discussion for the group, etc. But otherwise, I'll just kind of go into these one by one and start to talk through them. But I hope this has been helpful, at least at establishing a bit more of a top-down view, 50,000-foot view of what actually goes into publicity. And if it feels a little overwhelming, don't worry. You don't need to do all of these things all the time. There is a limited amount that you need to do, I think, in order to see a baseline of success. And so we'll establish that. You can always do more. Same thing with a publicist professionally. You can always do more. But there is a baseline that if you do it, you will achieve success, almost definitely. Obviously, nothing is guaranteed in earned media, but there are basic things that if you do, you will have a level of success. That's true of social media too. It's an area where it creates huge stress and sort of insecurity, and oftentimes feelings of inadequacy in artists that they're not doing enough. It also is an area where artists waste a huge amount of time. And again, there's an unlimited number of things you can do on your social media, but there are a select few things that actually will help get the results that drive a career forward. And so that's what I want to try to talk about. And the goal of this, again, is to get as much of a baseline skill set in this as possible, so that artists who are not ready for publicity, just don't have the budget for it, to hire somebody to do this, can do it themselves without just blowing their minds out and spending all their time on it. So I hope it's useful. I hope it's kind of build some interest and excitement to learn these things. And I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. I don't know what weekends are anymore, but those of you in New York, I hope you get outside today. It's lovely. Thank you guys so much as ever. Take care.